back to another episode of Justification. I want to thank you for joining me on this lovely morning. Again, we have made it. We are at the center of the week, almost there, but we have made it to another day. We have made it to another center of the week. We have made it to another opportunity for exercising our faith, for exercising things that we have been learning and unlearning, pruning and purging from the little bits and pieces that are starting to dawn upon us and make us think in a bit of a different way. And the goal is to draw nearer to the living God. The goal is to draw nearer to the character within the Bible. But the goal is also to challenge our human being and the being of our faith by the things that we are unfolding. And so my intention, to draw no offense, my intention to stir up conflict, which is really something that, the living God's chief apostle mentioned, or is mentioned of him in the book of Luke, where he came to stir up a fire, where he came to stir up controversy. And that controversy regarding our personal relation, in a more perfect sense, our faith's personal relation to the living God's devotional character. And this has been, since our first meeting up until this time, this has been the intention, and will continue to be the intention for our time together. And especially today's episode, because we have been harping on, like I previously said, bits and pieces of things to put into place, principles that the Bible articulates. We have been, going over them and reviewing them and consistently rehearsing them, and in new ways to hopefully draw you, more curious and draw you nearer to a vision of curiosity, to where you may be saying, "Where's he going? Where does this make sense?" That's what I'm hoping, and I'm thankful for you being here and to stay through to see the culmination. This episode I don't even know if we're going to pick up from the last episode, because we're going to get into something completely interesting, completely different. We're going to analyze this realm, or this scheme of justification that we have been saying. And the theme that has been revolving around, or topic of interest, is that there needs to be a putting away or a putting off of the former devotional mind, of the former devotional conversation, of our former habits, practices, policies, and rituals, creeds, commandments, and deeds that have been formally accomplished. We need to put those away, and there needs to be a transitioning into something more thorough, into something more individual, into something more personal, into something more benevolent. And our last meeting, we spoke about this benevolence, or even if it wasn't articulated in the meetings previously, we spoke about this benevolence, how the living God's benevolence is this very act of awakening our faith sensibilities, of awakening our devotional conversations conscience to the fact that we have a human being, to the fact that we have an inward being, and to the fact that we have a mind within our faith, thoughts and feelings within our faith that need to be cultivated, that need to be developed, and that need to go through a period of exercising for continual development in order for us to then benefit from it without us having to force its benefit, or to realize that we need to acknowledge its benefit right then and there in order for it to work for us. So just as our body, we've said in previous meetings, just as our body works for us, and we really have no thought of controlling that aspect of our body, and yet it goes. Our immune system drops, our immune system rises. We may take what we may take for our immune system. That means nothing. Our immune system can still fall, and our immune system still has the opportunity to decide to either rise or not. We don't control this 100%. It controls itself. It works for us. It works for itself. And this is where we need to get our faith at. And this is the illustration that we have been perpetuating or building up since our first meeting. So what gives me the right to say everything that I have said thus far concerning the need and the Bible articulating the need for us to personally unshackle our faith from its former traditional habits or its former religious or spiritual habits, to then discover a vision or a landscape that is greater than what we have been involved with, through exercising the words that are within the Bible, through exercising our mind on the words that are within the Bible. What gives me, and it's not just me, because we've gone through and we've seen Isaiah, we've gone through and we've seen Paul, we've gone through and we've seen Peter, we've gone through and we've seen much in the Bible illustrating this one particular point. What gives me the right to term this point, that term, or that word justification? What gives me the right to give this experience, to say that the Bible is calling this experience justification? And this is what I've been building up for in our previous meetings. So everything thus far that has been reviewed, everything that we have gone over, everything that we have highlighted, everything that we have emphasized, it all builds up to this one point, because now once we're here to the specific philosophy that the Bible gives for this fact, we can now think back and we can now allow those pieces of the puzzle to fall into place so that we can move forward in our understanding what the Bible is saying. Now, everything revolves around the living God's chief apostle and about his crucifixion. The problem is the way that this is viewed. In the traditional sense, traditional religious theology associates the body of the man, the physical body of the man, as being the all in all. Traditional religious philosophy associates the aura of the man and the aura within the man, highlighting his human being, enclosing that humanity as what the Bible articulates as being the fact of the matter. Now, we have been reviewing from the Bible, and from the Bible, this articulation that is traditionally understood to be credible, it deviates from what the Bible teaches. Our previous meetings have shown this, and now we will really get into this. The crucifixion of this man can be viewed in two ways, and I'll put it in this manner. In this manner, I will begin in this manner in the book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy chapter 22. Wasn't sure I was going to begin here, but Deuteronomy chapter 22. Just this one point is what we will be magnifying at this time. Deuteronomy chapter 22 and verse 23. Deuteronomy chapter 22 and verse 23 says, "He that is hanged is accursed of God." He that is hanged is accursed of God. And this term hanged, we can exchange it for the word crucify. He that is crucified, he that is hanged, is accursed of God. So now we can look at this from really only one perspective, because this is the only perspective that the Bible gives us at this point in time. If one is hanged or if one is crucified, and according to the Bible, the one that is hanged or the one that is crucified is accursed, that individual to God, if we're going to remain in the Bible, has no credible thing in him. The body hanging, the body crucified, according to the Bible, is accursed. The body is accursed, the man is accursed, meaning that there would be no thing that God, in reality, should have to do with one that is accursed. Because one that is hanged, he that is hanged is accursed. And this messes with what we are to believe, because we believe that the one hanging, the one crucified, is actually the one that there's a blessing to come from this. But according to the Bible, there is no blessing attached to the one that is crucified. There is no blessing attached to the one that is hanged. There is no literal blessing attached to the one that is hanged. So then, what's the big deal about this story? What's the big deal about this story? Because if the Bible is telling us that the crucified individual is accursed, and if the Bible will also tell us in the book of James and throughout, there is no respect of persons by God. There's no respect of persons. Every single individual that is to be hanged or crucified should be looked at as accursed of God, meaning our handling of this body, our handling of any crucified body. And this is where it gets interesting because it's challenging. It's challenging. The handling of this crucified body means the handling of what is accursed. And if we're going to remain in this context of the Moses script, we're told repeatedly to put away what is accursed, lest you be an accursed thing with it. So the Bible is letting us know that what is accursed is accursed. Just as it says in the book of Numbers, when the prophet said, what God is blessed, what God is cursed. What can I do about that? Traditional theology has inserted something more. Has inserted something more that is from without the Bible to reverse the angle of the direction that the Bible is getting at. And this may seem crazy, and I'm pretty sure the apostles back in the day may have been called this crazy. But turning to the book of Galatians, because Paul actually articulates everything that I'm saying. But he says it and articulates it in a way where he is flipping the illustration inside out. Example, Galatians 3. Galatians 3 and verse 13. Galatians 3 and verse 13. Galatians 3 and verse 13. Christ hath redeemed us from the curse of the law, being made a curse for us. And now listen to what he now says after this. Christ hath redeemed us from the curse of the law, being made a curse for us. For it is written, cursed is everyone that hangeth on a tree. Now, Paul just quoted Deuteronomy. Ridiculous. Paul just quoted Deuteronomy. And Paul is emphasizing what Deuteronomy is not. Deuteronomy is emphasizing that the body, what is hanged, who is hanged, they are accursed completely of God. Now, we can look at this in two ways, and Paul is allowing us to look at this in the second way. The first way is to observe this as a literal transaction. The literal transaction is the living God's chief apostle was crucified. The handling of his body is the handling of what is accursed. Therefore, what is built up upon this body, what is built up upon this natural organism, it is accursed. And anything added to it, anything taken to it is just as accursed as that. There is no glory in the crucified individual, is what Moses is saying. Paul is saying, but yet there is. Paul is looking at the praise within this individual, not from a natural point of view. Paul is looking at this illustration from the correct point of view. He's looking at it through the lens of illustration. The living God's chief apostle, whoever is hanged is accursed, is cursed. This individual is cursed. But Paul understands that this individual fulfilling a mission that was attached to him specifically and doing it in a way that was written of and fulfilled precisely in the manner that it was to be written of, understands that what Moses wrote has absolutely nothing to do with what is physical. This is why Paul associates the man's body to what he calls the law. The crucifixion of this body is the alleviation of what is termed, quote unquote, the philosophy of the religious law. Again, the crucifixion of this body does not and should not, according to Paul, and we will see as we move forward, this body should not represent a physical, literal, human, male body, but it should represent a body of knowledge of a philosophy of a religious law. And this really changes the way that we go about looking at the living God's chief apostle. Because Paul is articulating something that Moses wrote, but Paul is putting it in its right context. Based on the criteria of this individual, based on this individual's career, based on his ministry, based on the message of his ministry, and based on the reason for why he died. Paul gleans something special that really nobody else at that point in time pinpointed in this clear way. And it is that Moses, he that is hanged is accursed of God. Yes, Moses wrote this, but according to who this individual was, there is a deeper level of understanding connected to it. And Paul, articulating that deeper level of understanding, that this man's body was a physical representation, was a spiritual representation, was an analogy, was an allegory for the philosophy of the religious law maintained by the Jews. The crucifixion of this body represents the crucifixion of this philosophy. The crucifixion of this body represents the crucifixion of the belief and of the routine and of the exercise that through theory, through commandments, through deeds, there is a quote-unquote justifying of the individual. And even in the book of Isaiah chapter 51, when speaking about this man's mission, it says, "My servant shall redeem by his knowledge." Getting into this term salvation and redemption and justification, from our first meeting until now, we are seeing that this term does not traditionally mean what the Bible is referencing it as. The redemption of spoken of within the Bible is a redemption occurring within. This is why he said the kingdom of God is within you. Lo here, lo there. Don't look, because there's nothing that will come from above or without. The denomination or the dispensation of what the living God is trying to achieve is occurring within. And it begins with this one principle of understanding how the first apostles understood this man's body in crucifixion to mean that the physical representation of him, his body being crucified, represented the crucifixion of the philosophy of the religious law. This means with this body crucified and this philosophy of the religious law being what is crucified, this is the encapsulation of what is to be termed as death. When our faith's intellect is in this box of routine, of theory, of commandment, and of deed, our faith is dying. Our faith has no knowledge that it exists, and that it exists for a reason to better us. While we're busy trying to better it, it is withering away, and our genuine reason for pursuing the living God is passing away. The first apostles understanding that what is accursed of God is not a human being, but what the body of the human being represents, is revolutionary. It's revolutionary because this is why the actual man was crucified. He was crucified because his doctrine held that one cannot know the living God until one is allowed to let the spirit of their mind find edification. You have to be born again. Not by water, physical. But as Paul says in the book of Ephesians chapter 4, be renewed in the spirit of your mind. That which is of the spirit is spirit, John 3:6. It is the spirit of the mind that has to be reborn. The question is, though, from what? And the answer is from what the body of this man represents, fully and completely. This is what the first apostles were preaching, and this is what the living God's chief apostle preached and was crucified for. Paul, when Paul further speaks on this subject to the Ephesians, in Ephesians chapter 2 and 15, we'll just turn there. In Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 15, this little piece, this little snippet. In Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 15, it reads, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, even the law of commandments contained in ordinances, for to make in himself of twain one new man, so making peace. Again, Paul is articulating the fact that this man's body, when we think about this man and this man crucified, we ought to allow our mind to be exercised a little further than normal, to let the body of this man be perceived, let the flesh of this man be perceived as the philosophy of the religious law, tied down by ordinances and deeds, commandments and rituals, rites and policies. This former way of acknowledging the living God as one's personal savior is here false. Hereafter, this is false. We read last time the philosophy of the religious law. Why is it relevant? And we saw how Paul allowed us to know that this was relevant only for a period of time until the individual to whom this should be alleviated should come. We are reviewing that alleviation. The crucifixion of this individual, his body was that alleviation. That crucified body represents the act of alleviating our faith from depending on a routine to determine the justness of our faith and belief. The crucifixion of this body represents the crucifixion of the philosophy of the religious law, which is a crucifixion meaning our debt, our link, our being tied to the fact that we need to go through a routine and maintain a specific religious tradition tied to some specific or non-specific religious denomination in order to be in tune or aligned with the living God and with his character. The crucifixion of this body means everything for where our faith needs to be. And so when we read in the book of Isaiah, I will take them down a new way. I will take them down a new path. I will make dark. I will make darkness light before them. You know, when we're reading Sing a New Song, when we're reading all of these things, my salvation is near. I will make my law a judgment and a light for the people to rest on. When we're hearing all of this, and now we're seeing, you know, the heat of it. We're seeing the heat of it, and we're seeing the individual bearing the brunt of its fulfillment. And we're seeing the articulation of it within the Bible by the apostles that had to preach these things to Jewish and Jewish Roman ministers, to get them to understand that it is not what was before. The way of going about the living God and the way of going about our personal devotional conversation and the way of preaching the way to go about the devotional conversations habit should no longer be linked to what we formerly understood. There is a new encouragement for us to go through an experience, a personal experience with the living God's words and with the Bible, with the scriptures, to know the God in whom we trust. And for the purpose of knowing ourselves to trust. This former manner needs to be put off. The way of allowing the mind to find refinement through exercising itself on the words that are within the Bible, the way of allowing the putting off and the putting away of what formerly was tied to us, maybe emotionally, maybe in some other way, letting that die the same way this man died, and allowing that death to symbolize what his body also symbolized as us putting away that former routine, patiently and temperately, elevating our thoughts, elevating our feelings to an experience that is real. This is what we need to transcend to. This is what we need to chase. And so this is just interesting, because everything that we have come to know today has been turned upside down and inside out from what the apostles first taught. And so turning to the book of Romans chapter 7. Romans chapter 7, reading a couple of verses. Romans chapter 7 and verse 4 through 6, Paul again illustrates this transition that we need to be thinking about when it comes to the living God's chief apostle and when it comes to framing what his body actually represents. And Romans chapter 7 verses 4 through 6 reads, "Wherefore, my brethren, ye also are become dead to the law by the body of Christ, that ye should be married to another, even to him who was raised from the dead, that we should bring forth fruit unto God. For when we were in the flesh, the motions of sins which were by the law did work in our members to bring forth fruit unto death." Now here it is in verse 6. "But now we are delivered from the law, that being dead wherein we were held, that we should serve in newness of spirit and not in oldness of the letter." And this is the controversy. This is the controversy of the age. The entire point of us taking our time from our first meeting up until now was so that we can grasp the controversy of the age. We don't know it because we're not there. We're not going to feel it 100, but going to these points that we have been going through, seeing them, and now seeing it articulated, and now seeing the controversy being handled, because the apostles are handling this controversy doctrinally, philosophically. They are warring with priests and ministers who are teaching another philosophy of something about this man's body being what should be held dear to. What the apostles are teaching is that we were held dead formerly in our routine. When it came to our praise, when it came to our acknowledging of the living God and our relation to him, we were dead in that practice. But now this man being dead, we know that this man is that man. This man being dead, it should now symbolize to us that we are also now dead from that former routine to then pick up a new way of observing our faith and our relation to the living God's devotional character. We should no longer be living by the oldness of that philosophy. We should be living in a new spirit of mind, a new spirit of mind of devotion. And this is what should be drawing us nearer in experience to the living God and nothing more.